Close your eyes for a moment and imagine learning English not through pressure, but through calm stories that gently stay in your mind. Every morning, Elias followed the same quiet path beside the river. The world felt softer at that hour, as if the night had gently washed away the noise of yesterday. The water moved slowly, reflecting the pale gold of the rising sun. Birds hovered above the reeds, calling out in delicate rhythms that seemed almost like music. Elias often paused to observe the way light fractured on the surface of the water, creating fleeting patterns that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. He was not in a hurry. Time, for him, had begun to lose its sharp edges. Each step on the gravel path felt deliberate, grounding him in the present moment. Sometimes an old fisherman sat nearby, silent and still, casting his line into the current. They never spoke, but there was a shared understanding between them, a quiet acceptance of life's simplicity. Elias realized that peace was not something distant or rare. It lived in ordinary places, waiting patiently to be noticed. Next is in the center of the town stood an ancient library with tall arched windows and shelves that seemed to stretch into infinity. Clara discovered it one rainy afternoon while seeking shelter. Inside, the air carried the scent of aged paper and polished wood. Dust particles floated gently in beams of soft light. It felt less like a building and more like a sanctuary of forgotten thoughts. Clara wandered between aisles, tracing her fingers along the spines of books with elegant, fatting titles. Each book seemed to whisper silently, as if holding memories of distant lives. She chose one at random and settled into a worn armchair. As she read, the outside world dissolved. The ticking of time became irrelevant, replaced by the rhythm of sentences and imagination. Hours passed unnoticed. When she finally looked up, she felt strangely renewed, as though she had traveled without moving. The librarian, an elderly man with calm eyes, smiled gently and said, "Books do not just tell stories, they return us to ourselves." Clara never forgot those words. Next is behind a small cottage. There was a garden that seemed almost alive in its stillness. Mr. Rowan tended it every evening, speaking softly to the plants as if they were old friends. The roses grew in deep shades of crimson and blush, while lavender released a calming fragrance that drifted through the air like invisible silk. Bees moved lazily from flower to flower, unhurried and purposeful. Mr. Rowan believed that silence had its own language. As he watered the soil, he would pause and listen, not for words but for presence. One evening, a young girl passed by and stopped at the gate. She watched him curiously. "Why do you talk to flowers?" she asked. He smiled, "Because they respond differently, not with sound but with growth." The girl stayed for a while, noticing how peaceful everything felt. Even the wind seemed to move more gently in that place. From that day on, she understood that attention itself could be a form of kindness. Next is the train departed just before dawn, its metallic wheels echoing softly through the mist-covered valley. Inside, passengers sat in quiet contemplation, each carrying their own invisible story. Arjun sat by the window, watching mountains rise like ancient guardians on either side of the track. Their peaks were wrapped in clouds, shifting like slow-moving thoughts. The journey was long, but no one seemed restless. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of the train, the steady clatter that resembled a heartbeat. At one stop, an old woman boarded carrying a woven basket of oranges. She offered one to Arjun without a word. He accepted with gratitude, surprised by the simple gesture. The taste of the fruit was bright and refreshing, as if it contained the essence of sunlight itself. As the train continued its journey, Arjun realized that travel was not only about reaching destinations. It was also about witnessing the quiet beauty between departure and arrival. Next is in a small room overlooking the street. A single candle burned every evening. Its flame flickered gently, casting warm patterns on the walls. Myra often sat beside it, writing thoughts in her journal. The world outside was busy and unpredictable, but inside her room, everything slowed down. The candle became her companion. It did not speak, yet it offered comfort through its steady presence. One night a strong wind rattled the window. The flame trembled but did not go out. Myra watched closely, almost holding her breath, as if she shared the candle's struggle. Eventually, the wind passed, and the flame returned to its calm glow. Myra smiled softly. She understood something then. Resilience is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet persistence, like a small light refusing to disappear in the dark. In a quiet antique shop hidden between modern buildings, there was an old wooden clock that seemed slightly different from the rest. Its hands moved with unusual grace, almost like they were breathing. No one paid much attention to it until Daniel bought it. When he placed it in his room, something subtle changed. The ticking sound became softer, almost like a whisper. Mornings felt longer. Even sunlight seemed to linger a little more gently across the floor. Daniel noticed that he no longer rushed through his daily routine. Breakfast tasted richer. Conversations felt deeper. Even silence became meaningful. One evening he realized something strange. The clock had not changed time, it had changed his perception of it. And in that realization, Daniel discovered that peace is not found in extra hours, but in how deeply we live the ones we already have. In a small public garden, there was a wooden bench placed beneath an old cherry tree. Every spring, its branches burst into soft pink blossoms that fell like gentle snowfall. Lena visited that bench whenever her thoughts became too heavy. She would sit quietly, watching petals drift through the air, each one landing softly on the ground as if it had no desire to rush. The world around her continued moving, people walking, cars passing. But under the cherry tree, everything felt distant and slow. One afternoon, an elderly man sat beside her without speaking. He simply nodded and looked up at the blossoms. After a long silence, he said, "Some places teach us how to breathe again." Lena didn't respond, but she understood. From that day, she no longer saw the bench as just a place to sit. It became a reminder that stillness is also a form of healing. On a lonely stretch of coastline stood a lighthouse, its white tower rising above the crashing waves. The keeper, an old man named Rowan, lived there alone. Every night he would climb the spiral stairs and light the lamp, guiding distant ships through the darkness. But in the quiet hours before dawn, he often sat by the window, listening to the ocean breathe. The sea was never silent. It spoke in waves, in wind, in endless motion. Yet Rowan had learned to hear its deeper language, the language of patience. One stormy night, the wind roared fiercely, shaking the tower. But Rowan remained calm, steadying the flame as it flickered. When morning arrived, the storm had passed, leaving the ocean glowing softly under pale light. Rowan smiled faintly. He understood that even chaos eventually learns how to rest. A child named Ion folded a small paper boat and placed it on a narrow stream near his home. The water carried it gently, as if it understood its fragile journey. Ion followed it barefoot along the muddy bank, watching it drift through curves and shadows. Sometimes it paused against a stone, then slowly continued as the current shifted. He imagined the boat traveling far beyond his village, crossing fields, forests, and cities he had never seen. At one point, the boat tilted slightly but did not sink. It simply adjusted and continued forward. Ian smiled. He realized that even small things can move through life with grace, as long as they trust the flow of the current. Myra lived in a small room with a single window facing the east. Every morning, sunlight entered slowly, filling the space with warm, golden tones. She never rushed to start her day. Instead, she would sit near the window, letting the light settle around her like a quiet presence. The room was simple, just a bed, a table, and a few books, but it felt complete. One morning, As she watched dust particles floating in the sunlight, she noticed how even the smallest movement had its own beauty. She began to write again, not hurried thoughts but gentle reflections about life, stillness, and awareness. And in that quiet room, she understood something profound. Peace is not found outside. It grows in the spaces where we allow ourselves to simply be. There was an old stone bridge at the edge of a quiet town, where the river flowed slowly beneath like a ribbon of glass. People crossed it every day, but few ever stopped to notice it. Alina came there each evening after work. She would lean against the cold stone railing and watch the water move beneath her, carrying leaves, twigs, and reflections of fading light. She didn't think about the past or the future during those moments. Instead, she observed the present, the soft sound of water, the coolness of air, the gentle fading of daylight. One evening, an artist sat nearby sketching the view. Without looking up, he said, "This place doesn't change, only the way we see it does." Alina smiled faintly. For the first time, she understood that peace is not found in changing life, but in changing attention. In a busy city filled with endless movement, there was a small room on the top floor of an old building. The room was unusual because it was completely silent, not because the world outside was quiet, but because nothing inside demanded attention. No television, no clock, no notifications, only a chair, a desk, and a single window facing the sky. Raffi often visited this room when life felt overwhelming. At first, the silence felt heavy, almost uncomfortable, but slowly it began to soften. He started noticing subtle things, the rhythm of his own breathing, the distant hum of traffic, the shifting colors of clouds outside the window. One day, he realized he was no longer escaping noise. He was learning how to hear himself. Every autumn, an old man named Harun sat beneath a large maple tree in his garden. The leaves would turn shades of gold and crimson before drifting slowly to the ground. He never rushed to gather them. Instead, he watched them fall one by one, as if each leaf carried a quiet message. A young boy once asked him, "Why do you just sit and watch?" Harun replied gently, "Because nothing is in a hurry here. Even letting go has its own rhythm." The boy sat beside him for a while, observing the silent dance of falling leaves. And in that moment, he learned something he had never been taught in school. That change is not something to fear. It is something to observe with calm acceptance. A man named Imran boarded a train with a ticket in his hand and a destination in mind. But as the journey continued, something unusual happened. He stopped focusing on where he was going. Instead, he began watching everything around him: the shifting landscapes, the distant villages, the golden fields stretching endlessly under the sun. The rhythm of the train became soothing, almost meditative. Conversations around him faded into background sound. At one station, he realized he had missed his stop. But instead of regret, he felt something unexpected: lightness. He closed his eyes and thought, perhaps not every journey is meant to be controlled. And for the first time, he simply continued riding. Behind an old wooden gate, there was a hidden garden that very few people knew about. It was not large or grand, but it had a quiet dignity. Wildflowers grew freely between stones, and bees moved gently through the air like drifting thoughts. A small fountain in the center created a soft, continuous melody. Mina discovered the garden by accident while walking home one evening. She stepped inside and immediately felt the difference in atmosphere. Everything seemed slower, softer, more intentional. She sat near the fountain and closed her eyes. The sound of water blended with the rustling leaves, creating a natural rhythm that eased her thoughts. An old caretaker noticed her and said, "This garden doesn't ask for attention, it only asks for presence." Mina understood. And from that day, she returned whenever the world outside felt too loud. And now, let this story settle gently in your mind. You don't need to remember everything. just the feeling of calm English flowing naturally. If you enjoyed this peaceful learning journey, come back anytime for more stories that teach you slowly, softly, and deeply.